All right, let's turn in our Bibles to Genesis 31, and we'll read 43 through 55. Large section. So we'll just read that in just a few moments. Genesis 31, 43 through 55. And okay, I think we're ready to go. We're having a little trouble with our projector this morning, so we'll just see how we can get through this. Keeps blanking out on the screen. So, alrighty, why don't we go ahead, before I make any comments, why don't we go ahead and read that 43 through 55.
Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, and the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children, whom they have borne? So now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and that it be a witness between you and me."
So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, "Gather some stones." So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jagar Dutha.
Good.
Something.
You got it.
And Jacob called it Galeed.
Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." That is why it was called Galeed. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, "May the Lord keep watch between you and me, when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me."
Then Laban said to Jacob, "Here's this heap, and here's this pillar, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness. I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap, and this pillar to me, for harm."
May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home.
All right, good. So the story ends well. And of course, we began this several weeks ago with what we call this whole encounter with father-in-law and son-in-law, Jacob and Laban. And I called Act 1 this meeting. Act 1 is the meeting with Laban's accusation. Remember, Jacob left by cover and was skedaddling it to the hill country of Gilead, hoping to seek refuge there. And he was overcome by his father-in-law right in the very area where he thought he would have safety, which was, we talked a lot about that. At that time, Laban just accused him of stealing and why did you run away? I wasn't able to give you a formal send-off, and really belittled Jacob. And then we went, and then there was a pause. The pause, and I went to Act 2. Act 2 was Jacob's response. the idea that how is he going to respond to these accusations? A lot of pent up, anger, a lot of pent up history here, and that key phrase that I keyed on was, "I was afraid," and that's the point. Is that when a man comes to a point in his life where he can say for the first time that I am afraid, because that's not a popular thing for us men to do, because it goes so against our egos. Nobody wants to admit fear, but it's a huge step. We look at it as a step backwards, but it's actually a huge step forward in what God can do through the power of transformation of the Holy Spirit. Act 3 was now the search, searching for the family gods, of which Rachel hid those in a very clever way, and they were not found. And Jacob or Rachel went free over that whole thing. And then what I'm calling the outcome was, what is going to be Jacob's response now that he does this search? Evidence shows that he's clean, he didn't steal, and now what I called was a mixed response back to his father-in-law, a release of all this pent-up anger and emotion that was there over time. And where we left this was the idea that transformation in our lives is it's a mixed bag. It's not like we were kind of taught earlier on in our Christian experience, you pray this prayer and then you're automatically transformed. Well, there is a reality of that, in that we become new in Christ, but the actual working of that out takes a lifetime. There's a lot that has to change in our lives, and we look at it as like 2 steps forward, 3 steps backwards. Well, that is how it works. That's normative in our lives, and so that's where I left that. And so before we move on to what I'm calling the last act, Act 4, I wanted to show you where this is. And the hills of Gilead are here. We're right near the Jabbok River, and I outlined this area, Mahanaim. That's going to be mentioned in the text to come. So they're right in this area right here. Mizpah isn't on this particular map. This is a patriarchal map. Notice that Jerusalem isn't even mentioned here. It's before Jerusalem existed, so it's a very early patriarch map. But this is the area that they're at. So, Act 4. I'm going to go through this text now and just kind of work through verse by verse. I call this Laban's wiring, and when we talk about our wiring, your brother uses this term quite a bit. Where he says, I'm just wired this way. That's really, when I think of that term, I think of your brother Daryl, because he talks about that. And I'm wired this way, or he's wired that way, and we understand what that means. We're just kind of, our bent is a certain way. And so Laban's wiring here, in verse 43 it says, "Then Laban replied to Jacob, 'The daughters are my daughters, and the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine.'" Now, that is not a way to build rapport with your son-in-law. His whole point was, I want to get away. This is my stuff. I have earned this. I have worked hard over the last 20 years, if we saw in the prior text. He's been working and working, and his father-in-law seems so out of it, so really not in sync at all with the conversation. And so I think, gee, why is this guy so out of touch here? And I came up with 2 options. One is he's appealing to a Near Eastern belief. I couldn't find any evidence of this in any of the commentaries I thought, but I thought, gee, it could be reasonable, because in the Near Eastern belief, the patriarch was the head of the entire family. And so was there some belief that until the patriarch passes the inheritance on to the next generation or dies, that he is really the rightful owner of all things, kind of by, what do you call it? I can't, just out of respect, I guess. And I'm just stating that out of my own head here. I didn't see any evidence in there, but I thought, gee, maybe he is just stating this belief. Option B, it's just the way it is, and there's this wiring. Laban this is the way it is. Have you ever met anybody like that? Maybe pretty close to home. It's just the way it is. And whether it is that way or not is probably up for debate, but he's saying this is the way it is. I still see it this way. I still see it. This all belongs to me. Regardless, whether it's option A or option B, he's not building rapport. He's not building rapport at this point in the conversation. Okay, then we go to B, or 2, and I see an amazing turn of events in 43 or 44a. So now, come, let us make a covenant. He first of all states in 44b, but what can I do this day to these my daughters or to these children whom they have borne? What is he saying there? He says, it's all mine, but, however, what can I do to these daughters and children? What's your take on that? What's he saying?
He wants to share them
Yeah.
in some way.
I think he's coming at a place of stated ownership, but he's seeing for the first time in his life that he's not in control. He's starting to relinquish control. He's taking a belief. He believes he owns these things, but for the first time in his life, he's willing to relinquish that control and to give it over. Thus, the next statement, let's make a covenant. A covenant is about coming together, not about separation. Everything prior to this, in all 3 acts of this encounter, it's been separate. They're fighting for their ground. Except, of course, with the exception of Jacob, and he says, I'm afraid. But the natural way that we respond and we interact when there's conflict is we go toe to toe and we fight for our ground. This is why I think this is so amazing, because it's kind of catching on that what Jacob let out, I'm afraid, now his father-in-law is saying, yes, I own this, but what power do I really have here? Let's make a covenant. Okay? Do you see? I see that as an amazing turn of events. And fortunately, Jacob, or then in 44b, he says, let this be a witness between you and me. Now, this is my thought. I put a little phrase on there. It says, Laban realizes his need for something bigger. When you and I relinquish control over something, we realize for the first time that maybe I'm not to be trusted here, or maybe the other person isn't to be trusted. We need something larger that we can both be held accountable to. It's for the first time he's questioning himself, because being in control, you don't need any authority, you don't need any accountability. But by saying this can be a witness between you and I, He's appealing to the need that I need something bigger. I need something bigger in my life. And that is an amazing thing, that when you and I as men, we reach out for that first time and we say, God, I can't do this. I can't do this. I need you to do this for me. That would, be one example. Or, in a relationship where, gee, I don't have all the answers here. I see where I've been wrong. Our human tendency is to keep trying to find the demon, find an enemy, because somehow we get in our human condition a lot of satisfaction with the idea of having an enemy. Because if I have an enemy, I can feel better myself. And so what this is doing is saying, what I'm seeing here is that no, the enemy is not out there. The enemy is in here, and we need to start with the demon within. You have a comment? I can.
Pogo said it years ago.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
We have met the enemy, and he is us.
Yes, that's right. So number 3 is exactly it. The proposal, let it be a witness. Of course, we're going to look at it, what it is. Number 4, he says, verse 45 and 46, then Jacob, Jacob jumped all over this. He said, let's make a covenant. Let's set this up as a witness between you and I. And so Jacob said, let's get after it. He jumped all over it. And there's a coming together here in an amazing way. He said, Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Jacob said to his kinmen, now let's gather stones. Notice the engagement, building together. A covenant involves a coming together and a joint investment into this new relationship, into this new defined relationship. It's a coming together. And so they're all gathering stones, and they took the stones and they made a heap, and they ate there by the heap, signifying the almost the consummation through a meal of this time and this very important place. Now Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. Both of those, one is in Aramaic and one is Hebrew, and they both mean a heap. It's just a heap. They're now searching for a name, and they're naming the place. This is a significant place. We've built this stone. We've gathered together. We've cooperated, and we're building this heap. And we're now going to name this as a significant place. And they settle on the name. They kind of move around a little bit, but they settle on the name Mitzpah, which means watchtower. And that's what I attempted to draw there, is that little watchtower. And the idea that now God, represented by the triangle, that God himself will watch over, in both directions, or in all directions, all 4 directions, from this watchtower, this Mitzpah, and will watch over, and God is their witness in this relationship. It's an amazingly beautiful, beautiful thing. One thing that is related here, or actually very much a part of this, is that to name the place. These in the Old Testament, they were constantly building these altars, and they named these places because the value of being there in that moment, and then as years go on, to look back at that moment, we named that was our mitzvah, in this case, and the value of naming places. Have any of you had any experience with that? I'm curious. Have you ever, can you, as you think back in a significant time in your life, and there was a moment in time that you can recall, and you can bring it up just like that? No. The answer to that is no.
Well, I know when my wife came back to me and said, this relationship will not continue unless you give your life to Christ, I know exactly where it was. I know the room I was in.
Yeah.
And even though that might be pressure, I did, and it changed my life.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is you can recall a moment and that changed your life. And the idea of the naming, you know, it's like old friends getting together. And you remember that time? You remember that time when we were, there? It pulls it up like that. And you could name it. We don't generally do that, but they named it. They named those places. Those places of significance. So you name the place, and then the conditions. The conditions are stated for this new relationship, and they're verses 50 through 54. And he says, "If you mistreat my daughters," this is of course Laban talking, "mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives beside my daughters, although no man is with us, see God is witness," mitzvah, he will see as a watchtower between you and me. Now, my take on Laban, this is the old Laban coming out here. He doesn't want to complicate his inheritance here. So let's keep it within the family ties. Let's just keep the family we have. And then he says, Laban said to Jacob, "Behold this heap, and behold a pillar which I have set between you and me." Verse 52, "This heap is a witness, and a pillar is a witness, that I will not pass by this heap to you for harm, and you will not pass this heap and this pillar for me for harm." So there you go. There it is. There's going to be this marker in their lives, a geographic marker, that if they're en route, whenever they pass that marker, they've got to ask themselves the question: Am I on this route to induce harm, or am I on this route to, for other purposes? And so, what that marker is, that watchtower, that heap, is a place for them to come to a point of decision as far as what their intentions are. It's great graphic example. And then the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his kinsmen to the meal, and they ate the meal and spent the night on the mountain. And so there they were. This took a while. They were there for a couple of days, it looks like. And the conditions, the way I summarized them, is no surprises. I don't want to hear that you've brought in a bunch of new wives. So that's condition number one. Condition number two is, I will leave you alone, and you will leave me alone. That's kind of my summary of that. And then the last thing, which is amazing, the way this text started in verse 43, you'd never think it would end up in blessing. With that first statement, with Laban claiming his ownership. But a marvelous change of events took place. And instead of pulling apart and continuing to pull apart and fight, they were able to come together through that proposal, let's make a covenant. And it ended with blessing. It ended with, instead of pulling apart and brokenness, it ended with life and impartation of life and blessing to all those around. So here you got it. Laban's wiring. He wasn't very skilled at interpersonal relationships, and he was pretty self-centered. But the interesting thing is that when he was willing to relinquish that control, and that's what made the difference. When you and I are in a conflict, taking the side of the other individual and laying down your arms means everything. And I'm sure we've all got examples of both positive and negative that. It's just stop the fighting. It's not worth it. And to lay it down. It can be perceived as weakness, but it's not weakness at all. Because who is our example? Steve said Jesus Christ. He was the one that said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. The proposal, let's make a covenant. Let's work together to make this thing happen and come together. Let's name this place as far as future significance of what this place and time means for us for the remainder of our lives. And then let's state expectations of what this is all about. And basically I boiled it down with, I want no surprises, and I will not do you harm and you won't do me harm. And then to end the entire meeting, this whole thing, how from where it started to where it ended is just absolutely amazing. It ends with blessing. It tells me there is a God, because just in our humanness, this could have been a disaster. But by two guys who were, I think, Jacob, who let out with his I am afraid, and then Laban, where he comes to a place where I think he's willing to relinquish control. Some really great things happen. So, all right, I think that's it. Thank you for coming, you guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Right.